Hello everyone, Ruby Ravel here, mustering up all the existential resignation and world weariness that this hellscape of a world has to offer, so that I can talk to you today about Venus's square with Saturn. But before I begrudgingly explore that most curmudgeonly and unsatisfying of aspects, I thought I would do a little précis of the outer planetary contact currently occurring with Venus in Taurus, and then figure out how its square with Saturn in Pisces might play out. Now, Venus in Taurus by herself treats a relationship like the maintenance of a well-tended garden. If she has her landscaped garden arranged just so with immaculate botanical feng shui, everything organized in perfect harmony and beauty, then she's going to do everything in her power to keep it exactly how she likes it. She doesn't want to add in any new elements, nor does she want anything that is already there to which she is deeply attached to be damaged or to atrophy in any way. And that means she likes to have strong rhythms and rituals and routines, all of which help to reinforce, crystallize and solidify what is already there, to make sure that it is all in good functioning order. You know, she goes out every morning at the same time, waters the plants, prunes what needs to be pruned, makes sure she keeps all those nasty aphids away. She wants that garden to be almost like a living painting, this beautiful Eden that has been frozen in time, which she can trust will always be exactly as she wants it to be, that no unwanted change will come along and mess with this botanical utopia that she has created for her own private enjoyment. She likes what she likes, and she also knows what she doesn't like. And from that, she can build these solid, lasting structures that reify themselves in relationships that can give her a sense of being more deeply rooted in the most pleasant side of what life has to offer. But when Venus conjuncts Uranus in Taurus, suddenly there is a disturbance in her paradise. There is an earthquake that shakes up and challenges the existing order of what she has created. She comes down one morning having had a strange shock in the night, but she doesn't rush. First of all, she puts on her nice velvet dressing gown, she puts on her nice cozy slippers, she tiptoes downstairs, makes herself a coffee, and then decides to look outside and find out what all the ruckus was. And right there, amid all the petunias and the begonias and the lovely birch tree that she has, she sees a strange plant that is unlike anything she has ever seen before. It is like there is a foreign species of flower that has descended from another planet and decided to temporarily take up home in her garden. And Venus in Taurus looks at this Uranian plant and says, "This is odd, this is peculiar, this is strange, this is unlike anything I've ever seen before. I'm not saying I dislike it, but it's unusual. It certainly stretches and challenges my existing values and aesthetic temperament. I'm going to have to look within my existing valuation systems and figure out a way of finding space for this new foreign alien species that has suddenly interrupted the nice pattern I had before." She takes time to get to know this alien plant, to see what it needs and what it doesn't need. The thing she finds most troublesome about this Uranian plant is that not only does it spend a lot of time seeming to uproot and destroy some of the other foliage in the garden, but it also does not remain rooted. Rather than staying in one spot, it's always getting up and walking around and putting itself in different parts of the garden and then moving along later. It refuses to be instilled within a static version of order. Its job is to challenge order rather than obey it. And that rather annoys Venus in Taurus, who would much rather this frozen paradise, not this thing that's turbulent and always in upheaval. But she knows that, this conjunction with Uranus isn't going to end until April the 11th, so she says, all right, I'll wait it out. At some point this weirdo will go. But the Uranian plant has been there to teach her a message, to say that love isn't static, love isn't this thing that you freeze in place, that there are other forms of loving, other ways of relating that are unconventional and unusual and liberating and progressive, where things cannot be tied down and tamed and commodified like objects, and that you might find whole new ways of relating to other people if you are willing to look beyond your existing conventions and creature comforts and look to the heavens for your romantic inspiration rather than always being guided by the sedentary rhythms of the earth. Then, on the night of April 2nd, when Venus started trining Pluto, Aphrodite was lying in her comfortable bed when she had this horrible nightmare that demons had invaded her beautiful garden and turned it into a kind of hellscape from a Hieronymus Bosch painting, with all of these horrible goblin-esque orgies and torturous scenes of atrocity taking place. And this dream is so visceral and so real that she runs down to the garden, all composure lost. And when she looks out into her garden, she finds that someone has chopped the birch tree at the center, which she loves so much, down. Now, up until this point, she had a huge amount of trust in the resilience and the staying power of her garden, but realizing that it was susceptible to death, that it wasn't immortal, that her attachment couldn't prevent it from interloping forces of decay, starts to make her paranoid. She realizes, because of the face of mortality, just how much this garden truly means to her. She loves it with this life and death urgency, and therefore wants to protect it in exactly the same way. And she is so terrified about people coming into her garden and destroying it and taking her possessions and uprooting all her hard work, that she starts to build these elaborate barbed wire fences around the garden, and to build these vigilant watchtowers, and to put up these security cameras and these machine gun turrets, just so everyone knows this is my damn garden. You are not getting in here without me destroying you. And there are times when she gets so paranoid about anyone coming into her garden and destroying it that she thinks, maybe I should just destroy the garden. If I destroyed the garden, if I burnt it up, I would get to it before someone else did. That way, the destruction of the garden would have been in my control rather than being something wrested away from me by the impersonal, malignant, malicious grand forces out there in the world that are always trying to wrest from me the things that I love. And she fights with that weird self-sabotaging headspace for a while, but then she climbs up onto her machine gun turret one day and realizes there is a garden adjacent to hers. And in this garden, she sees another birch tree that was even more beautiful than the one she lost. And suddenly, instead of just being obsessed with her own garden, she's obsessed with someone else's. She can't stop thinking about it. She thinks about this birch tree day and night. She doesn't feel that she will truly ever experience any satisfaction or peace or serenity in the world until this birch tree is hers. And she lays awake at night thinking about ways she could sneak into this other garden, uproot that birch tree and make it her own. But therein she knows that she is violating an ancient law of property rights, which she would not want to have violated against herself. And this also creates a lot of emotional inattention. This experience teaches Venus that just because we love someone and the relationship that we have with them, that doesn't mean that we can control them or that we can stop the forces of transformation that will inevitably touch that relationship at some point. That there will be transfigurations and metamorphoses that will necessarily occur. And that the more that we try and stave off those forces of transformation, the more likely we are to bring ruination on our head and to alienate ourselves from the things that we are actually trying to protect. Instead of being something that protects life, we end up becoming the harbingers of its destruction. But it also teaches Venus something about the pain of obsessive, one-sided love. That just because we desire and long for someone with all our heart, with a burning, ferocious, Luciferian passion, we still have to accept that it isn't ours, that no matter what plots or ploys or machinations we put in place, unless that thing is meant to be ours, we have to accept that it has a will of its own, and that we cannot necessarily subvert, tame, or manipulate that will to our own ends. So where does Venus square Saturn in Pisces fit in with this elaborate arboreal analogy? Well, Saturn reminds us that our relationships have their limitations, they have their deficiencies, they have their weaknesses, they have their boundaries, that there are certain limits and demarcations imposed on how far it can grow. If we go back to the metaphor of a garden, if we plant a potato, it's going to become a potato. If we plant strawberries, we're going to get strawberries. We can't expect them to transgress the rules of their morphology and become something that they are not. And this is true of relationships as well, that all relationships have an inherent morphology built into them. There are certain potentials that they are capable of living and reaching up to, but there are also going to be weak areas of insecurity and uncertainty which might be improved with hard work, but some of which may just be setbacks and deprivations that we have to learn to stoically accept. That in order to have all the bounty and beauty and unique pleasures of a certain relationship, we also have to be willing to resign ourselves to those things that will probably always be stagnant and unsatisfying and not quite as we would wish them to be. You know, when we're in the Jupiterian or Neptunian phase of a relationship, then we just see the limitless potential of what our love combined with someone else's could do. We think of the heavenly Olympian heights that we as a couple could rise to. We think, yes, our love is grand, it is magnificent, it is universal and all-encompassing. Each and every single one of our last dreams will be fulfilled through the fusion of us together as two romantically charged beings. There is no bounty, there is no treasure, there is no cornucopia that heaven would dare deny to such star-blessed lovers. We are star-blessed, not star-crossed. And that's where Saturn says you're wrong. You know? Everyone has to be held back in some way. We all need to be taught restraint, otherwise we develop hubris, otherwise we think we are as great as the gods themselves, and we end up being hoisted by our own petard. We end up becoming the engineers of our own downfall because we refuse to believe that there may be areas in which we can stop. And relationships can be guilty of hubris every bit as much as individual people can. And it's when we think that we are heavenly, pompous and beyond reproach that reproach is most certainly going to approach us. So in the early stages of a relationship, it can be very easy to project gods on the other person. Let's say Venus falls in love with a new man that she happens to meet on her travels through the earth, and at first she thinks he is as handsome as Adonis, he is as muscular as Hercules, he is as much a party animal and raconteur as Jove himself. He just seems to be this perfect composite of everything. And then one day she starts transiting in square to Venus, and suddenly he doesn't look very much like Adonis, he doesn't act very much like Hercules. Saturn says he's not any of those things. He's not a god, he's just a bloke called Dave. You know, truth be told, he's not a bad chap. He's got a relatively stable job. He drinks a bit too much. He's a little bit gassy. He could probably work a bit more on his personal hygiene. You know, he might need a little bit of extra schooling in the bedroom to really satisfy you in the way you would like, but, you know, he's all right. He's mortal. He's human. He's not a god. And that's when Venus in Taurus has to look at that mortal and say, okay, either I can accept that, I can love this man for what he is, rather than just the mythic archetypes that he draws out in me, or she can say, I've been deceived, this isn't good enough, I can do better, this is woefully insufficient, I'm not satisfied, I am going to look elsewhere and find someone who is as muscular as Hercules and who is as handsome as Adonis himself, you know? So there is a choice there as to whether we accept those Saturnian limitations that we encounter in other people or not. So with Venus square Saturn, we love and accept someone for what they realistically, truthfully, factually, warts and all are, as well as accepting all the things that they will not be. We say, I love you for who you are, but I also love you in spite of all the things that you will not necessarily be able to give me. If we go back to the garden analogy, we can look at that garden and we can say, great, you know, I've got these tulips, I've got these strawberries, I've got apple, pear, and perry cider trees growing in abundance, but for some reason, when I plant pineapples in this garden, they don't take root. When I plant palm trees, I get nothing. No coconuts, no dates. There's all these wonderful, exotic, exquisite fructifications from the earth that I love and adore and would really like to taste and savor and add to my palate, but that's just not going to happen in this garden, honey. And either you can love your garden for its limitations, or you may just have to start from scratch and go somewhere else where that romantic climate produces those kinds of fruits. But in that context, it may mean forfeiting those fruits. You can go out, you can start a new garden, you can get the pineapples, coconuts and dates, but then you find you start missing the apples and the pears and the perry cider that you got so plentifully from your former arboreal commitments. But Saturn in Pisces specifically represents the emotional blockages that we may find arising in certain partnerships. It represents a conflict between neediness and independence. By itself, the energies of Pisces in a relationship want to experience total spiritual and emotional fusion with someone else. It wants to be clingy, it wants to be needy, it wants to be dependent on someone else. It wants to feel that it has totally surrendered itself to the love of another being, and that through that they have overcome all feelings of isolation and separation, that there has been this grand communion of two souls becoming one. And that can be very beautiful, and there's many works of art that memorialize and celebrate that type of relationship. But Saturn is uncomfortable with that kind of deep emotional overlapping with another person. Saturn feels that it shouldn't be dependent, that it should be a fully formed, strong, independent adult that can stand on its own, meet all its own needs, and never need anyone else. And yet Saturn in Pisces is faced with the crisis that even though it's travelled through all the 11 other signs of the zodiac, it has learnt all the different lessons and tricks and techniques of their various trades that it has had to impart to this grand craftsman of the cosmos. In spite of all that, Saturn is still horrified to find that he still needs other people, that he is still in some way has found that there is still a craving within him that he cannot meet in himself, that this desire for his own other world, for his own inner dreams and fantasies to be admixed with someone else's dreams and fantasies still remains as this deep existential craving, this desire to stop actually being this mature, responsible adult all the time who, like Atlas, is holding up the four corners of the sky and just let go and be a baby surrendering to the arms of a cosmic mother. It wants this so much, and yet to give itself that would seem to be the denial and relinquishment and dissolution of everything that he's spent the last 30 years attempting to construct. How could he possibly allow that? I built this castle for a reason, and now these feelings are telling me I need to tear this castle down. And that can be very tricky in a relationship if we are longing for that, if one party is longing for that kind of deep emotional dependency with someone else, and yet they can't quite bring themselves to ask for it because that Saturnine pride is getting in the way. They would really like to be needy. They would really like to let their guard down and just give themselves totally and completely to the other person. But their fear of rejection, their fear of being morally and socially condemned for not upholding this rigorous, upstanding archetype that they feel it as their duty to embody is so strong that it almost makes them just feel it would be better just to avoid getting close to people altogether, because getting close to other people seems to be tantamount with being rejected by those people. And much in the same way that Pluto will sometimes destroy something that it loves so that someone else cannot destroy it, with Venus square Saturn, rather than risk being rejected by someone else, we build up such a steely, concrete, cold and self-sufficient exterior that we reject everyone before anyone's even had a chance to get close enough for them to reject us. We build a wall to keep everyone else so that no one can possibly come over the other side and make us feel bad. We make ourselves feel bad and defeated and depressed in advance, so that if anyone else does it, it's fine, we're already in that state. You're just pouring water into an already depthless pool of misery. There's not much that can really change here. I've done hard work already. I have made myself lonely and miserable. There's very little you can do to exacerbate that. And this is where there ends up being confusion and miscommunication between the two planets. Venus is there tending her garden when she sees Saturn kind of loitering and loafing around, looking a bit miserable and forlorn, and yet oddly impenetrable at the same time. And she goes, "You're right, Saturn, you're just kind of skulking over there. Don't you want to come over here and sit with me and we'll have some nice tea and cake?" And Saturn says, "No, there's no point." And she says, "Well, why? Why don't you tell me what you're feeling? Why don't you tell me what's going on? I'm sure I'll understand." And Saturn in Pisces says, "No. No one will ever understand. No one will ever truly know what is going on inside me, so there's no point even trying to express it. I might as well just give up now." And Venus in Taurus thinks, well, this is getting a bit too complex for my liking. Oh, what a drama queen. But there is a choice involved here, as there so often is with squares. Because we can feel so separate, so isolated, as though there are these big brick walls between us and the people we love during Venus-Saturn transit, sometimes that can be a time where we feel the need to withdraw, where we feel the need to get away from everyone and everything and to be a bit hermetic, because we are feeling so guarded and shut off, even when we are in the company of those people. Rather than feel that frustration that their presence arouses, we might just say, okay, it's better off if I'm just spend some time on my own and work through this funk and these inner obstacles until eventually I come to some kind of state of resolution and mature acceptance of them, and then come back later in a more fully formed, rooted and grounded state. Or we can try and overcome those tensions and obstacles together and respond to things as mature adults and try and work as a united front on those obstacles and give each other the patience to grow, understanding that when we are dealing with those deep inner wounds and fears and areas of deprivation, that things aren't going to suddenly change overnight just because we direct love towards them or if we get frustrated and angry at them. That when things are struggling to take root in a given area, it requires taking a longer term view of things, and that all depends how we feel about that longer term view. Do we like a future in which we have to work this hard to get something that we desperately crave and want and need, but which doesn't seem to be taking place? Or do we feel that it's too much and that we would rather cut our losses and seek another paradise elsewhere? Who knows? Anyway, I think this has run on for enough now. I hope you enjoyed it. Every bit as much as I'm sure as I'm not going to enjoy this aspect, but I'm going to try and deal with it responsibly. I'm so responsible, as you all know. Saturn herself, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, with a heavy heart, I wish you all lots of love. I'm probably going to go back out in the garden now and have another cup of tea and watch the doves having sex in the tree in the corner, because that's about as much intimacy as I'm likely to get at the moment.